Hello and welcome to another IFL Science interview. I'm Dr. Russel Moul, and today I'm speaking with Patrick Olson about his deeply original new show, Emergence. Hello, Patrick, and thanks for joining us.
Hello, Russell. Thank you for having me.
So let's jump straight in. So tell us, what is Emergence, and what does this really mean for you?
It's an entirely fair question. It's emergence is a little bit like everyone can tell you what time is until they're asked to define it, and it's a little bit like that because the show is, as you said, I think it is very original, and it's form breaking. It doesn't really fit into a lot of the pre-existing genres, particularly in the Broadway ecosystem in New York. So it's not a play, and it's not a musical, and it's not a rock concert, and it's not a monologue. It's not a TED talk. It's not emergent, or it's not immersive graphics, and yet it is kind of all of those things together in what I like to think of is a new form. And the theme of the show, if there's a through line through the whole thing, it's things are not as they seem. So the show is broken into segments, and with each segment, there's a short talk where I speak about something that is plainly familiar, plainly obvious, and we all have preset ideas about what that thing is, the color of a flower, for instance. And then we peel away the superficial perceptions that surround um, those understandings and learn that really underneath it, the universe is wildly mysterious, and there are major implications for all of these things that most of us, including myself, until I learned of them, are unaware. And that makes it kind of an interesting show. We complement that then with lots of music and lots of immersive graphics and performance art and dance. And I like to think the whole thing comes together to deliver sort of a new set of insights, a new sense of connection with spiritual feelings about the nature of the universe. And it's also just really entertaining.
Which is the most important part, really.
Which I think is the most important part.
Excellent, thank you. So the description of your show mentions that you ask big, bold questions. Could you provide some examples of the questions the production explores and how they connect to the overall narrative you're putting out?
Sure. So some of the questions are just very odd, and they wouldn't normally be asked. For instance, one of the questions is, when are we? And the obvious answer to that is, well, if you mean when do we exist now. And that is true for those observers who are close enough to you to share a simultaneous now. But the farther you go away, the less simultaneous nows are, such that when you begin to think about potential neighbors, in a neighboring galaxy of Andromeda, their now is different than our now. And it's separated by 2.5 million years of travel, of light, and of the speed of causation. So I think that's super interesting to begin to think that whether something can exist or not exist is a function of the location of the observer. That would be an example.
So you explore this idea. I'm assuming this nests with other ideas to kind of form a full narrative of events. Does the performance operate in that way?
It does. So that would be one question. Another question would be, how do we perceive things?
Mm.
And in that context, I talk a little bit about how it feels as if our eyes and ears are like open windows where light and sound just kind of enter into your mind directly, but it's nothing like that. The brain is this fantastic originator where it creates giant simulations of your environment, and you sort of watch a movie that your brain itself created, which is not how we think normally. We just sort of travel through life, myself included. We're on the way to the dry cleaners. We have to pick up our clothing, then we've got a dinner thing, and after that, you got to put the kids to bed. Behind all of that are immensely interesting and exhilarating insights into the nature of reality that just don't lay on the surface. You have to kind of peel it away a little bit. But once you do that, it's both disorienting and beautiful, I believe.
So it sounds like quite a human story, a very kind of lived experience of the world interacting with the theoretical aspects that explain it, but equally how we experience it as within ourselves.
I think it absolutely is centered around being human, and we return to that a lot. It's not just, here's an interesting feature of physics. Here's what happens inside of a black hole. I always try to tie it to what does it mean to us in our daily experience and our sense of connection to the universe.
Okay. So with that in mind then, what do you think audiences will, or what should audiences expect in terms of this kind of live music on the ensemble of different musicians and visual effects in Emergence? How do these elements all come together to help you tell this quite grand narrative, which is at the same time very normal as well?
It is. Yeah, I think I'll tell you what people tell me, rather than what my intentions are or my hopes are. What I see reflected back to me from people who come out of the show is a sense of connection and disorientation combined, which is normally those things don't go together. But I think the show is organized in a way where people feel a sense of communion and togetherness and connection with the performers and also with their neighbors in the seats next to them, because we're all connected in the same way. And yet, because we start with familiar things and then reveal how different things really are, how things are not as they seem, there's this sense of what do you mean objects don't have color? I mean, that's kind of an earthquake. If you really internalize that concept and you realize that color comes from the wavelengths, the varied wavelengths in visible light, and without visible light, there is no color, and objects have no inherent color. They only have surface properties. That's really profoundly disorienting. And we talk about that in the show, and we sing about it, and we dance about it, and the singing and the dancing is not. I don't want to sound disparaging at all, because this is, I'm in an ecosystem, a creative ecosystem here with intense talent and accomplishment, but it's not Broadway. This is substantially edgier, and the dance, people are going to sit back in their chairs and their eyes are going to grow wide and their jaws are going to drop, and they're going to say, this is not, this is not classical ballet. And the music, there are pretty songs and there are pretty parts of songs, and then there are very challenging and difficult sections of music as well. So I think that's what is reflected to me most with people who are coming out of the show, is they feel warm and great and big fat smiles, and then very rapidly they talk about the disorientation of this and how they feel a need to kind of rethink and rejigger their perceptions around some of what they've learned in the show.
Oh, that's really interesting. I particularly like how you referred to it as a kind of communion of sorts, which gives a very different sense of the experience for the individual.
It does. And I mean, I use the word communion a lot because, there's a trend happening, in Western industrialized countries in particular, which is referred to by a lot of different labels like de-churching, or, the challenge that churches are experiencing right now with people basically leaving congregations, and they're thinning out rapidly. And it's a dramatic demographic change that's happening in this country. And yet, I don't feel like people are any less spiritual. I don't think spirituality is changing. I feel like the definition of spirituality that I really love is having a relationship to the universe based on a profound level of mental and emotional communion, to use that word, right? And to have a profound level of mental and emotional communion with the universe says nothing about any particular religious doctrine or any set of ideas that you have to subscribe to. And so for people who are evidence-based and who don't identify with specific religious doctrines, yet who feel spiritual, where do you go for that kind of connectivity? People who go to church experience sort of the lateral beauty of people next to them who subscribe to the same belief sets or to similar belief sets, and they feel love and they feel empowerment, and they're drawn to this effervescent, transcendent feeling of global, universal love. They get that. But for those of us who are science-oriented and who require evidence for assertions, evidence in proportion to the claim, we don't really have a place where we can go and put our hands on other people's shoulders and say, God, this is amazing. And just to experience the meaning of shared awe and wonder it's a rare thing, and we don't have the institutions for it. And I'm not suggesting that the show Emergence will serve as that, but it was part of what drove me to do this. It was part of my the stimulation behind it is I don't want to be just myself. I want to be connected with other people on the level of the theme of this show and in the concepts related to this show.
Yeah, it sounds like a really worthy endeavour. It's also making me very sad that I'm in Canterbury and can't get to America to watch it. But you've just mentioned how those threads kind of helped inspire you in the first place. So that moves me nicely onto this question. Could you share some of the insights into how your general background as a composer, musician, educational science publisher, and entrepreneur has kind of helped influence the creation and direction of Emergence?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think I was 8 years old when I strutted up magnanimously to my mother and said, "I shall no longer play other people's music." My piano teaching mother. So most of my life I've kind of been an odd bird. I know that. I've not really been a joiner. I've had good friends and great mentors, and I've been surrounded by people that I love and people who love me. So I'm not a loner in any sense, but I've just never really felt attachment to strict formal bodies of thinking. I've always kind of struggled with that a little bit, including even just learning to read music, like that formality, or when I was a kid playing football, learning how to read football plays. I had a devil of a time with those sort of graphical, the symbolic nature of communication. There are dimensions to that I just can't deal with. It's very hard for me. So I've been independent in a lot of my actions and thoughts and all that stuff over the years, and not really an institution person. But I think the most important thing that happened along the way that has led ultimately to this show was being a founder of a publishing company. And in the end, we found that our niche, where we really succeeded and were excellent, was in scientific publishing. And for the college market, for the educational market. And my job there brought me into contact with hundreds and hundreds of scientists. And they're just fascinating people, and I so admire the discipline of their thinking, and I so admire the structures of their methodologies and the organization of thought and the pursuit of truth. I mean, they're a human population, so you're gonna have a mix of people, of course. Some you'd want to spend more time with than others, but in general, I think of scientists as models, and they taught me so much, and they peeled away this paradigm of normal daily living in my mind, and they exposed me to the mysteries of the universe in ways that I feel like incredibly fortunate to have had many hundreds or who knows, 1,000 or two conversations with really smart people who have spent decades studying a thing and are maybe the most important experts of that topic in the world. And oh my gosh, I got to talk to them, and they got to shape my mind. And I think much of what I learned there really did find its way into this show, and I think it's compelling.
Excellent. Yeah, so it's the coming together of many threads of your life to create this final thing.
That's right. Yeah, and like I had another experience, and I talk about this in the show, where I like to write music and mix music in my car, which I know is a really weird thing to do. But I play the music out of my laptop through the car speakers, and I play it really loud, because when I'm out driving around, it feels like a soundtrack to the world that I can see when I'm out in the world. And I like that connection. I don't like being enclosed in a small room. The music doesn't feel connected to me, to what I want it connected to. And so on one of these occasions, I was at a stoplight and had the music thumping quite loud, and a guy crossed in front of me on a scooter, a little scooter, and he came to a dead stop. And this guy looked exactly like Morgan Freeman. He came to a dead stop, and he turned his face up to me, and our eyes met, and I thought he was going to yell at me, because that's the old man thing. You yell at loud noisemakers. But he started bopping his head slowly to the beat of the song. And that, for me, I mean, I don't know, we spent 30 seconds together, just locked into this communion, to use that word again. And then he drove off, and that was it. And I honestly think of him as one of my most important teachers, because he showed me what it feels like to be connected to someone else in a creative undertaking like this. It didn't matter if it was me in the crosswalk or him in the car. I didn't care about that. What I cared about was that it wasn't just me anymore. It was a moment of us. And that was profoundly beautiful to me, and led me to want to share this music and share these ideas and share the performance art and share the dance and the immersive imagery and all this other stuff, to attempt to put it into a package that would move people. And it really came out of, those two experiences of, being a science publisher, and then this random serendipitous thing of some guy stopping in front of my car.
I mean, it's a very quick, validating experience. So, yeah, very important. But that raises that important question as well about this interaction then between art and science. So, do you have any views on why art may be useful for people interested in the sciences?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? But the requirements of science, if we really want to get down to the hardest of reproducible truths, we have to drive humanness out of that process, because humans are incredibly flawed, biased, difficult organisms, right? And on the pursuit to truth, if you have a lot of humanness stuck in there, it's not going to be true in the end. It's going to be wrong. And so science has gone way out of its way to develop structures and techniques that eliminate bias as much as is possible. And again, it's a human undertaking. So of course there are going to be examples where, the science isn't reproducible, or the data was falsified, or whatever. You're going to have little bits and pieces of that. But the main thrust of science is all about objective, reproducible truths, right? That are reinforced through multiple lines of inquiry and through other disciplines, and that tie into coherent and compelling theories. And the whole thing is this, very believable set of practices and results and insights that is incredibly motivating. But it can be very dry, because all the humanness has been driven out of the thing, right? And my mathematics is shallow, and so on some level I feel like a poet that is illiterate. I would love to have the mathematical understanding that so many of my physicist friends have. I don't have that. But I can tell you still what it's like to try to read a physics paper, and oh my gosh, it's void of anything that we would call warm and alive, right? And it has to be. But the other side of this is we're not just logically driven people. Logic helps us form a plan. Logic helps us see what may be true. But to get out of the chair, we need emotion. Emotion is the activator. That's the thing that pushes us off the couch and gets us to do something where we feel angry or we feel happy or we feel drawn to a thing. And emotion can deliver understanding in ways that science can't. Pure science. Emotion can deliver understanding in a human context. This is what it feels like to understand a thing. I just remember from the longest time ago, I think I was a kid in college, and I remember reading a poem by a poet named Carolyn Forche. And she was, I believe the poem had to do with someone walking out in the snow into the backyard, but they were gone. And she called it this trail of blue holes. And that stuck with me forever. And it's like you could have a scientific paper on the nature of light refracting through the snow and all of this kind of stuff that would describe why a footstep in snow is a slightly different color. But the poem is what stuck with me and what animates my thinking about that. And so I think putting these things together can create a very emotionally moving and memorable experience that either science by itself or pure performance by itself may not be able to deliver. Because pure performance by itself, I would call that entertainment, which is great. But if you want to go beyond entertainment and you want it to be entertaining, but you also want it to be emotionally moving. And thirdly, if you're really successful, you want it to maybe affect someone's way of seeing the world in a good way, then, that's hard to do. And it really requires, all the tools in the toolbox. And that's science and that is art. And somewhere in the space between those two things, there can be a very human understanding of what is true.
That's great. So my last quick question on this part will be, is there anything now you'd like to say to our listeners about your show?
Yes. It's difficult to describe, but I promise you, if you see the show, I'll do everything I can, and I know my fellow performers will do the same thing, to create an experience that will leave you stumbling in a daze out into traffic in 42nd Street, wondering what just happened.
Excellent. And the show starts on the 25th of October?
25th is the formal opening. We're in previews right now, so tickets are available. And then the show will run through the first week of January. Okay,
well, that's all we've got time for now. Thank you so much for listening to this IFL Science interview, all about Patrick Olson's Emergence. Don't miss it. Thank you for your time today, Patrick.
Thank you, Russell.